in class. Today we are going to look over my favorite story in the Dubliners, A Painful Case. I hope you all read last night and took a lot of notes. I want to check all your understandings of the story and make sure everyone is on the right track. Can anyone tell us anything about the central characters?
Duffy's one of our main characters. He's a banker. He follows the same daily routine.
Yeah. Okay, come sit down. You're late.
He follows the same daily routine. He's not adventurous. He's very organized. He lives alone. And then Joyce wrote, he wished to live as far as possible from the city of which he was a citizen, and because he found all the other suburbs of Dublin mean, modern, and pretentious. That is on page 70. And then his only source of adventure were the nights when he went out to watch the opera. Joyce also wrote, his liking for Mozart's music brought him sometimes to an opera or concert. These were the only dissipations of his life, which is on page 71. So one day, Duffy goes to an opera and meets Mrs. Sinico. They become really close and he thinks of their relationship just as a friendship, but eventually he cuts Mrs. Sinico off because she thought their friendship was more than it actually was, and he got scared because he's never been in love before. And he gets mad at himself when he finds out Mrs. Sinico died because he lost his first and only love, and he didn't realize he loved her until after she died. And now he feels more alone than ever. And Joyce also wrote, why had he withheld life from her? Why had he sentenced her to death? He felt his moral nature falling to pieces, and that is on page 76.
Excellent. And what do you think Duffy represented in Dublin life?
I think that Duffy represents the fear and isolation that is present in Dublin.
Yes, and we can also view Duffy as a protagonist. Does anyone know what the conflict he was ultimately faced with? Justin, you want to answer this one for me?
He didn't realize he lost his only opportunity at true love until it was too late.
Yes. Does anyone want to elaborate on that?
When he would hang out with Mrs. Sinico, he only viewed their relationship as a friendship, while she viewed it as more than that. But when he cut off their relationship, he didn't realize how much of an impact it would have on her. It was not until after she had died that he had realized where he messed up and how it would affect him, leaving him feeling lonelier than ever.
Perfect job explaining that. You guys mentioned Mrs. Sinico. Anybody want to explain more about her? You.
Hello!
Well, Mrs. Sinico is married to Captain Sinico. She shares a daughter with them. They go to the opera together, her and her daughter. Duffy hangs out with her at her house. She thinks of their relationship as more of a friendship, but she's devastated when Duffy ends the friendship. She ends up dying on the train tracks from a heart attack. She has some drinking problems a few years after Duffy cut her off. Her husband claims she was more distant after he returned from war, but it's because she was in love with Duffy. And on page 72, Mrs. Sinico, quote, alluded once or twice to her husband, but her tone was not such as to make the allusion a warning, quote, she represents the loneliness and unhappiness that is represented throughout the other Dubliner stories.
Nice job. Let's expand more on their relationship with each other. Duffy and Mrs. Sinico both had different feelings about their relationship towards each other. Mrs. Sinico, as we said, was in a marriage and has been in love. Duffy, on the other hand, has never experienced love before and did not know how to react to it. This may have been the factor that caused him to break off their relationship. What are your thoughts on this? Yes?
I think that his vulnerability and his fear of love were shown constantly throughout the story. Joyce wrote, the end of these discourses was the one night during which she had shown every sign of unusual excitement. This emphasizes the motive in his decision to cut off the relationship. Joyce specifically included this quote to highlight the fear in Duffy in being in love. Whether or not Mr. Duffy's experiences and insights into his life will lead to any change in his nature or behavior are questions not appropriate to the structure of the story. An article writes, he is given the chance at a romantic relationship with a woman, Mrs. Emily Sinico, whom he first meets at the concert and begins to see frequently. And then he had an opportunity at love, but he lost it.
Do you think that any of this relates to the title? Yes.
I think that the title, A Painful Case, can show how Duffy's lost opportunity of love was almost or equally as tragic as Mrs. Sinico's death. A life without love is a painful life to live.
I agree. I also would like to hear your thoughts on how A Painful Case ties into the Dubliners as a whole. How does this short story portray the overall meaning of this book? Yes.
I think that many of the stories in The Dubliners have a conflict that centralizes on loneliness and unreciprocated love. Evelyn, in the story that shares her name, gives up her chance at love by choosing her familiar life over an unknown adventure. Her eyes gave him no sign of love or farewell or recognition, even though her familiar routines are tinged with sadness and abuse. In a painful case, Mr. Duffy's obsession with his predictable life cost him a golden chance at love. One human being has seemed to love him, and he had denied her life and happiness. He had sentenced her to ignominy, a death of shame. The circularity of these Dubliners' lives effectively traps them, preventing them from being receptive to new experiences and happiness.
Yeah.
I've also noticed how Joyce uses different ages and periods in life to get the overall messages of his stories across to the readers. In a painful case, he chooses to write during Duffy's adolescence, and this is most likely because at this age in life, most people have found love. Duffy's absence of love emphasizes the pain Joyce indicates in the title.
Joyce does an excellent job incorporating the meaning of his title into his piece of writing. How does he carefully construct the structure of the story to highlight Duffy's loneliness? Yeah.
Joyce starts the story just how it ends, with Duffy being alone, but his feelings towards his loneliness change. An author from an online source states, in these closing lines, the sense of alienation that Mr. Duffy has experienced from the beginning of the story reasserts itself in the reader's imagination. Duffy's tone has changed dramatically. While previously Duffy had gloried his aloofness from the rest of humanity, the certitude that enabled such a view now seems missing.
Exactly. Joyce also uses a few notable literary devices we should consider and his purpose in including them. What devices stand out to you most?
Symbolism.
Motifs.
Yes, one of the symbols in the story is a river by Duffy's house. Duffy's house, located by the river, which is a biblical reference, and the crossing of a river means a better life. In this quote, he lived in an old somber house, and from his windows, he could look into the disused distillery or upwards along the shallow river on which Dublin is built, which is on page 70. The motif we are focusing on in this story is isolation. Duffy faces isolation of love. He is paralyzed from it. He cannot take action towards what his heart is telling him. He instead, out of fear, cuts off his only relationship that could have led to a deeper love. In the end, this isolates him from being able to feel loved or to love someone, and ultimately makes him feel even more alone. Joyce constantly emphasizes Duffy's loneliness throughout the story. He writes, he could hear nothing. The night was perfectly silent. He listened again, perfectly silent. He felt that he was alone. Now we are going to shift our attention towards Joyce's use of epiphany in the story and how it relates to the story overall. What are our thoughts on this?
At the beginning of the story, Duffy lived a boring, dull, and lonely lifestyle that was repeated every day until Mrs. Sinico came into his life. Duffy views their relationship only as a friendship and decides to let her go when things get intense. Duffy goes back to his boring life until he found out about Mrs. Sinico's death and had an epiphany of realizing that he let his true love go. Instead of taking this tragedy and turning his life around, Mr. Duffy acknowledges that he will forever be lonely. His fear and moral rigidity cause him to lose his only chance at not being alone and having a real friendship or relationship with someone else.
Yes, and I think overall it shows how he is the only thing preventing himself from living his life to the fullest and from falling in love. This demonstrates the origin of his paralysis and how it ultimately makes him feel alone in the end.
Amazing job today. I'd have to agree with you guys on that. This class did an excellent job with our discussion today. I always look forward to discussions with your class because you guys are so much brighter than my 7th period students. Keep up the good work, boys and girls. All right, class. Well, good job today. Please take one. Okay. Jeez, Justin.